Family was very important to Byron Carr. He and his brother John were very close in age, which helped them have a strong bond, and he remained close with his parents, especially his mother, into adulthood. He also had lots of friends and enjoyed traveling. Byron was a well-liked English teacher at Montague Regional High School. According to some of his former students, he had a heart of gold and remained interested in the lives of his students long after they completed his class. In 1988, 36-year-old Byron was living in a house on Lapthorne Avenue in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, which he took great pride in and kept very neat. It would be in this house where Byron was killed on November 11th, 1988. He was strangled with a towel, and his body had later been stabbed several times. The killer had written, "I will kill again" on Byron's wall, which obviously raised concerns that more victims would follow. Byron's wallet was also missing. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, and police believed Byron and the killer had consensual sex prior to his murder. Byron was gay, but kept his sexuality private to avoid the discrimination so many others dealt with at the time. He had not even come out to his parents, despite how close they were. His murder led to him being publicly outed. Decades later, investigators would say that Byron's sexuality led to a lack of public interest and cooperation in the case. Byron's family felt this was the case as well. In 2024, Byron's brother John would say, "People were afraid for their jobs just because they were gay at the time. Being gay wasn't a great thing back in 1988 in the public eye. I can remember public officials that were very lukewarm to taking part in the investigation." Other members of the LGBTQ community in the area feared that they may be targeted by the killer as well, and the wider community's cold response to the murder of a gay man only added to their fears that they were not safe on Prince Edward Island. Jeffrey Haight is one of Byron's former students, and a gay man who left Prince Edward Island for many years because he felt safer living in a big city. In 2024, he spoke to the CBC about Byron and his murder, saying, "Why was this situation created? Well, it was because society didn't let us be us, and we had to live in the shadows. And when you live in the shadows, you meet certain people you should not be around." Police believed the killer was bisexual, a conclusion they came to following the examination of the most important piece of evidence they had, the killer's underwear, which had been left behind at the scene. Police cut out a section from the front of the underwear to test it for DNA, and found both male and female DNA, believed to be from the owner of the underwear and a woman he had sex with. The size of the underwear indicated that the killer had a small build, as it fit very tightly when displayed on a mannequin with a 29.5-inch waist. Despite the societal unease around Byron's sexuality and murder, police did preserve evidence and investigate the crime. Hundreds of interviews were conducted over the ensuing decades. Police went to see Byron's parents every few years about the investigation, even though they rarely had substantial progress to report. Byron's case was formally reopened in October of 2007. Investigators hoped that since the LGBTQ community was becoming more accepted, witnesses who may have been scared to come forward in 1988 because it would involve disclosing their own sexuality would now be willing to speak with them. The Charlottetown Police Service also released a composite image of a suspect who attacked a gay man in Charlottetown just 2 months after Byron was killed, and was considered a person of interest in the murder. The case would remain unsolved until 2024. That January 26th, Chief Brad McConnell announced that the day before, 56-year-old Todd Joseph Gallant, also known as Todd Joseph Irving, had been arrested and charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of interfering with human remains in connection with Byron's murder. A second person had also been arrested but then released, although their potential involvement in the case is still being investigated. Police had long believed that at least one other man had come back with the killer to try to remove incriminating evidence from Byron's house after he was killed. In 2013, they revealed that 2 unconnected witnesses had come forward saying that a man had confessed to them that the killer had taken him back to Byron's house after the murder to get rid of evidence. The 2 witnesses came forward in 2008 and 2012 and knew details that had not been made public. The individual they reported, whose name has not been released, had been released on parole shortly before Byron was killed, had a violent criminal history, and had been a potential suspect in the murder early on in the investigation. However, he had passed away in the early 2000s, and as such, could not be interviewed about who brought him to Byron's house that night. Police believed that it was when the killer brought his accomplice to the scene hours after Byron was strangled with the towel that Byron was stabbed, the note was written on the wall, and Byron's wallet was stolen. These actions were taken to confuse police. Socks had been found in Byron's kitchen trash can. Police believed that someone had worn them on their hands in the house so that they would not leave behind any fingerprints. DNA was extracted from the inside of one of the socks, but it did not match the DNA on the underwear or the deceased reported accomplice. As such, a 3rd individual may have been involved in the attempted cleanup and tampering with the crime scene after the murder occurred. Gallant had only been 21 years old at the time of Byron's murder. He had been living in Charlottetown in 1988, but moved to the United States after Byron was killed. He lived in Texas and Arkansas before moving back to Prince Edward Island in 2022. He was convicted of breaking and entering in Canada in 1987 and had a criminal record in the United States as well. He had been identified using genetic genealogy. Charlottetown police worked with Wyndham Forensics Group and Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy to identify him as the contributor of the DNA at the crime scene, after familial matches to it were found in the family tree DNA and GEDmatch databases. Gallant's lawyer, Chris Montigny, appeared in court on Gallant's behalf on February 1st. The case was adjourned until the following month to give Montigny time to review the large amount of evidence and documents in the case. He does not yet know how his client will plead to the charges he is facing. On the day Byron was buried, his mother turned to her son John and told him, "It's not really over until we know what happened and why." It was never over for her, or for Byron's father, as they both passed away a few years before charges were brought in their son's case. Byron's brother John was still alive to see Gallant's arrest and was present at the press conference announcing it. He thanked police for all of their hard work and said of the arrest finally being made, "It's like a weight being lifted off you. It's hard to describe. It's just kind of a release." Carol Barrett grew up as one of 6 children on McIntyre Street in Zanesville, Ohio. She had a cheerful and spunky personality. She liked to make up her mind on her own and wasn't afraid to say what she thought. She was somewhat of a tomboy and regularly wrestled with her 3 brothers on the family's living room floor. In high school, she was a member of the concert band, the marching band, and the school radio station staff. Carol was very brave. In the summer of 1978, she jumped into the water to save her 2-year-old niece from drowning. That same year, Carol and her family went on vacation to Florida. Carol loved her time there and heard a lot about how much fun spring break was in the area. She begged her parents to let her go back to Florida for spring break the following spring, when she would be a senior in high school, but they did not allow it. Carol graduated in 1979 and went to work at a Wendy's restaurant with the goal of saving enough money to go to Florida the following spring. Not all of her money went to her trip savings, however. She used some of it to buy sheets and glassware and towels when she had the chance. She put the various home goods she was able to acquire in her hope chest, saving them for when she married her high school sweetheart, Tom, who had joined the Navy. When Carol wanted to go to Florida with her friends from high school in the spring of 1980, her parents finally allowed her to go. Carol began the drive to Daytona Beach shores on March 20th, with her large group of friends split between 2 vehicles. They drove throughout the night, taking turns driving. When they arrived in Daytona Beach shores, they checked into their rooms at the Treasure Island Motel. The girls were staying in room 617, and the boys were a floor below them in room 521. The group was hanging out in the girls' room that Saturday night. Shortly after 1 a.m. on Sunday morning, March 23rd, Carol and her friend Steve left the room to go walk around. On their way to the elevator, a man blocked their path. He pointed a pistol at them and told them that they were going to turn around and go back to their room. Steve told him that they did not have a key, but the man pointed the gun at Steve's face, and the three of them walked back to room 617. They knocked on the door and were let inside. The assailant followed Steve and Carol into the room and told all 8 people there at the time that he wanted their money. He made everyone undress and line up against the sliding glass door to the balcony. He spent about 45 minutes going through everyone's belongings and eventually pocketed approximately $200. Throughout that time, he periodically clicked his gun, according to one of Carol's friends. He seemed nervous over the fact that there was such a large group of people in the room. He touched them all with the barrel of his pistol to intimidate them. The assailant told the group that he would be taking one of them with him to ensure that no one called the police. He originally grabbed Carol's friend Pam, but grew frustrated when she panicked and began to sob. Carol volunteered to go in her place. She calmly did as he told her and collected her clothes. He forced the others in the room out onto the balcony and told them to stay there until 4 a.m. He would let Carol go if they did not call the police. He locked the sliding glass door and forced Carol out of the hotel room in front of him. Carol's friends did not listen to the instructions and quickly tried to get her help. Carol's friend Chris was able to climb around the block wall separating their balcony from the neighboring one and wake up the people sleeping inside that room. They called the police, but the assailant had a 20-minute head start before they arrived. On Monday morning, a passerby discovered Carol's body in a ditch line along I-95 near Jacksonville International Airport. Her white sweater had been pulled up over her head. She had been shot execution style, according to police. There were no other marks indicating that there had been any kind of struggle. 2 of Carol's friends identified her body, which was returned to Ohio and buried in the Mount Olive Cemetery. Carol's friends helped develop a sketch of what the killer looked like. He had reddish-brown hair, which was parted down the middle, a beard and mustache, a mole on his left cheek, and a long, straight nose. He wore tinted, wire-rimmed glasses. Unfortunately, despite the numerous eyewitnesses to Carol's abduction, her killer was not identified, and the case went cold. In August of 2017, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit reviewed the evidence in Carol's case and determined that there was enough to reopen the case. A palm print they had not been able to account for had been preserved in evidence and seemed like a clue that could tie a suspect to the murder. The case would not be closed until January of 2024. On January 25th, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office announced that the investigation had come to an end after more than 40 years. As with many other cold cases solved after decades, the identification of Carol's killer would not result in a trial. However, while most of these cases never go to court because a suspect died before their identification, in Carol's case, the man who confessed to her murder was still alive, but already serving life in prison. That man was serial killer Billy Mansfield Jr. Mansfield had an extensive history of sexual crimes. His crimes eventually progressed to murder, with him killing 3 young women and 2 teenage girls. He killed 4 of his victims in Florida and buried their bodies in his backyard. He then went to California, where he killed a 5th woman. He pled guilty to the California murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He also pled guilty to the 4 murders he committed in Florida to avoid being extradited there and facing the death penalty. He remains incarcerated in California and is speaking with investigators in various jurisdictions about additional cold cases. Mansfield was identified as a potential suspect in Carol's murder in 2020. He was interviewed by investigators multiple times over the following 2 years. In September of 2022, he acknowledged that he was the man depicted in the composite sketch. He later confessed to abducting Carol and to killing her. Investigators continued working on the case and consulted with the state attorney's office in the 4th Judicial Circuit about how to proceed. In January of 2024, it was decided to close Carol's case, but not pursue prosecuting Mansfield for her murder, since he is incarcerated and has no chance of ever being released, as he would have to serve 4 concurrent life sentences in Florida, even if he were somehow released from his life sentence in California. Carol's parents, one of her sisters, and 2 of her brothers passed away before her case was closed. Her surviving family is grateful for the answers they have received. Carol's niece, Claire Gilligan, is ecstatic that the case is solved and relieved that her aunt's killer has been incarcerated since 1982, which prevented him from killing even more people. Bert Allen Mann loved history from an early age, with a particular focus on the history of the American Civil War. He also loved classical music and opera. He grew up in Graham, Texas, and attended the University of Texas in Austin, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology. He also served with the U.S. Marines as a Navy corpsman in Vietnam. In 1994, 46-year-old Bert and his wife Dawn lived in the 2500 block of Stargrass Circle in South Austin, Texas. On May 12th of that year, Dawn came home to discover her husband's body lying on their floor. It appeared that a burglar had forced his way into their home through a back door, and Bert had arrived home from work while he was still inside. A struggle began near the front door, and Bert was ultimately stabbed several times. Police found the crime unusual because individuals who commit property crimes like burglary typically flee when discovered, rather than attack. The break-in and murder also occurred in the middle of the afternoon, when children would be coming home from school and adults would be arriving home from work. More than 20 detectives worked on the case over the ensuing years. Following the establishment of the Austin Police Department's Cold Case Unit in 2005, a blood stain that had been preserved from the crime scene was sent to the lab to test for DNA. The killer had apparently been injured as Bert tried to fight him off, and his blood had been left inside the house after he fled. A DNA profile was successfully developed from the blood stain, but no match to it was found in the combined DNA index system. In March of 2023, the unknown profile was sent to Bode Technology in hopes that they could use genetic genealogy to identify a suspect. In June of that year, they did just that. The man they believed could have been Bert's killer had never been a suspect in the case. The potential suspect was a man named Kenneth Wayne Robbins, who was living in Lubbock, Texas, and working as a long-haul truck driver. Investigators made attempts to surreptitiously collect items thrown away by Robbins to test them for DNA, but they were unsuccessful. Therefore, on September 8, 2023, detectives from Austin traveled to Lubbock with a search warrant to collect a DNA sample from Robbins. They served him with it at his work and collected the sample. He refused to speak with them. 5 days later, the Austin Police Department was contacted by Robbins' employer, who was obviously aware that the department had an interest in him. They reported that the GPS tracker in their truck, that Robbins was driving at the time, showed that it had been parked at a truck stop in Weatherford, Texas, and had not moved in what they considered to be a suspiciously long amount of time. Police in Austin contacted their counterparts in Weatherford and asked them to perform a welfare check. When they arrived at the truck, they found Robbins dead inside of it. His autopsy would find that he had committed suicide. On February 8, 2024, the Austin Police Department announced that they had identified Robbins as the sole person responsible for Bert's murder. The DNA sample taken from him was a match to the DNA from the crime scene, and had he not taken his own life, he would have been charged with capital murder. Not everyone in Bert's family lived to see his alleged killer identified. His father passed away in 2019, and his mother, Virginia, died just a year before the case was closed. Bert's widow and younger sister did finally learn who took Bert from them. We don't have that big question hanging over our hearts. I had really kind of given up hope that it would happen, and I'm so grateful," his sister, Kathy May, told KVUE News. She is relieved that she does not have to go through the stress of a trial, but is upset over what Robbins' family members must be going through in light of the news of his crime and his death.